The scorching Arizona sun bore down mercilessly as Josephine Valmont yanked her worn leather gloves tighter, desperate to keep her hands hidden despite the sweltering heat of summer 1885. The stagecoach lurched over another rut in the dusty road, sending her shoulder crashing against the wooden interior. Across from her, an elderly woman dozed fitfully, while a businessman dabbed perspiration from his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief. Neither paid her any mind exactly how she preferred it. Josephine stared out the small window as Red Rock came into view, a collection of weathered buildings shimmering in the heat. This remote town would be her fresh start, far from the whispers that had followed her in Boston. The stagecoach driver called out to his horses, the vehicle slowing as they approached the main street. "Red Rock. End of the line, folks," the driver announced. Josephine gathered her meager belongings, one trunk containing everything she owned in the world. The businessman hurried past without offering assistance, but the driver, a weather-beaten man with kind eyes, helped her down. "First time in these parts, miss?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'm to work for Dr. Nelson. His office is here." The driver pointed toward a whitewashed building with a small sign. "Down that way. Doc's a good man. Decent folk around here mostly, though keep your wits about you after sundown." He tipped his hat and returned to the stagecoach. Josephine stood alone in the dusty street, the weight of her decision pressing down heavier than the brutal sun. 22 years old, unmarried, and now hundreds of miles from everything familiar. Her gloved fingers tightened around the handle of her trunk. The decision had been necessary. After the fire at the textile mill, after what happened to her hands. She pushed the memories away and began walking toward the doctor's office. Dust clung to the hem of her dark blue traveling dress, but appearances mattered little now. What mattered was survival, the interior of Dr. Nelson's office was mercifully cool. A bell tinkled as she entered, and moments later a stout, gray-haired man with spectacles perched on his nose emerged from a back room. "You must be Miss Valmont," he said, smiling warmly. "Right on time. I'm Dr. Nelson." "Yes, sir." "Thank you for the opportunity. Your references from Boston were impeccable. I've needed a proper assistant for some time now. Can you start tomorrow?" "I can start today if needed," Josephine replied. "I just need to find lodging." "Mrs. Pemberton runs a boarding house for respectable ladies just down the street. Tell her I sent you." He glanced at her gloved hands but asked no questions. "We open at 7. Most days are quiet, but when they're not, they're quite the opposite." Josephine nodded. "I understand. I worked in a busy hospital in Boston." Dr. Nelson seemed satisfied. "Rest today. Tomorrow will come soon enough." With directions to the boarding house, Josephine stepped back into the harsh sunlight. She had almost reached her destination when two men on horseback galloped down the main street, sending pedestrians scattering. One rider yanked his reins, bringing his horse to a skidding halt directly in her path. "Pardon, madam," he called out, touching the brim of his hat. "Didn't see you there." Josephine stumbled backward, nearly losing her balance. The man dismounted in one fluid motion and steadied her with a hand on her elbow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "No," she replied stiffly, pulling away from his touch. "Please be more careful." The man's companion, still mounted, laughed. "Parker's idea of town manners, miss. He spends too much time with cattle to remember how to behave around ladies." Parker Jones shot his friend an annoyed glance before turning back to Josephine. "I apologize sincerely. Let me help with your trunk to make amends." "That won't be necessary," she insisted, tightening her grip on the handle, conscious of her gloved hands even in this heat. "Parker." A voice called from down the street. A tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest approached. "I need a word with you and Hank." "Be right there, Sheriff," Parker replied before turning back to Josephine. "May I at least know the name of the lady I nearly trampled?" Despite herself, Josephine felt a flutter of something unfamiliar. "Josephine Valmont." A slow smile spread across his face. "Parker Jones, miss. Foreman at the Double Circle Ranch." He gestured toward the sheriff. "Duty calls, but I hope our paths cross again under better circumstances." As he walked away, leading his horse, Josephine caught herself watching the easy confidence in his stride. She quickly looked away. Men like that handsome, charming cowboys were dangerous distractions she couldn't afford. Her purpose here was simple: work, save money, and keep her secret. Mrs. Pemberton proved to be a stern but fair landlady, showing Josephine to a small but clean room on the second floor of her boarding house. The other boarders were 3 school teachers and an elderly widow, all of whom kept to themselves. "Meals are at 6 noon and 6, Mrs. Pemberton explained. "No gentlemen callers in rooms, curfew at 9, rent due first of the month." "Yes, madam, thank you." Left alone, Josephine finally removed her gloves. The scarred, mottled skin of her hands looked even worse in the harsh light streaming through the window. She flexed her fingers, wincing at the tightness of the healing tissue. The fire had taken so much from her job, her confidence, and any hope of a normal life. No man would want a woman with hands like these. No one would want to touch them, hold them, or see them preparing food or tending wounds. She had learned to hide them, to become invisible in a world that valued perfection. Josephine replaced her gloves, unpacked her few belongings, and prepared for her first day of work in Red Rock, determined to keep her head down and her secrets close. The next morning, she arrived at Dr. Nelson's office 15 minutes early. The doctor seemed pleased with her punctuality and showed her where supplies were kept, explained his filing system, and outlined her responsibilities. "I understand you have nursing experience," he asked. "Yes, sir. 3 years at Massachusetts General." "Excellent. You'll need it. This may be a small town, but we serve the entire county. Ranchers, miners, travelers, all manner of injuries and ailments." The morning passed quietly with only 2 patients, a child with a cough and an elderly man seeking a tonic for his rheumatism. Josephine kept her gloves on, explaining to Dr. Nelson that she had a skin condition that required covering. He accepted this without question, commenting only that she should ensure they were clean when handling medical supplies. Just before noon, the office door burst open. 2 men carried a third between them, blood soaking through a makeshift bandage on his thigh. "Mining accident," one explained breathlessly. "Blasting cap went off early. Jim caught some shrapnel." Dr. Nelson immediately directed them to place the injured man on the examination table. "Miss Valmont, I'll need your assistance." Josephine moved efficiently, gathering supplies while Dr. Nelson cut away the blood-soaked trousers. The wound was deep, with metal fragments embedded in the flesh. "We'll need to remove the shrapnel and clean the wound thoroughly," Dr. Nelson said. "Can you administer chloroform?" "Yes, sir." Josephine prepared the anesthetic, her gloved hands moving with practiced precision. For the next hour, they worked together, extracting metal fragments, cleaning the wound, and stitching the torn flesh. Despite the awkwardness of working with gloves, Josephine's experience showed in her steady hands and calm demeanor. When they finished, Dr. Nelson nodded with approval. "Excellent work, Miss Valmont. Your references didn't exaggerate your abilities." "Thank you, sir." She began cleaning the instruments, maintaining her professional composure despite the warmth his words stirred within her. As the days passed, Josephine settled into a routine. She worked diligently at the doctor's office, kept to herself at the boarding house, and avoided unnecessary interactions in town. She wrote letters to her aunt in Boston but never mailed them, instead burning them in the small stove in her room. Some truths were too painful to share, even with family. On her third Saturday in Red Rock, Dr. Nelson insisted she take the afternoon off. "You've worked straight through since you arrived," he said. "The town has a small library in the schoolhouse. Mrs. Bennet allows borrowing on Saturdays." Reluctantly, Josephine agreed. Reading had always been her escape, and new books might help pass the lonely evenings. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with a bell tower. Inside, she found Mrs. Bennet, a middle-aged woman with a severe bun and kind eyes, arranging books on shelves. "Dr. Nelson's new assistant, aren't you?" Mrs. Bennet asked. "Welcome to our humble library. Not much compared to what you might find in Boston, but we have the classics and some newer works." Josephine browsed the shelves, selecting a volume of Tennyson's poetry and a novel by George Eliot. As she reached for a third book on a higher shelf, her glove caught on a splinter, tearing slightly at the seam. "Oh," she gasped, quickly withdrawing her hand before any skin was exposed. "Are you all right, dear?" Mrs. Bennet asked. "Yes, thank you, just caught my glove." Josephine clutched her selections close. "May I borrow these?" "Of course. Return them when you're finished. No rush." Outside, Josephine examined the tear in her glove. It wasn't large, but she would need to mend it immediately. She hurried toward the boarding house, head down, focused on keeping her hand concealed. She didn't see the rider approaching until he called out her name. "Miss Valmont." Looking up, she recognized Parker Jones atop a magnificent chestnut horse. He tipped his hat, that easy smile lighting his face. "Good afternoon," she replied stiffly, continuing to walk. He guided his horse alongside her at a slow pace. "Enjoying your Saturday?" "I was just visiting the library." "A reader, then? What books did you choose?" Despite her determination to remain aloof, Josephine found herself answering. "Tennyson and Eliot. Fine choices. I've a fondness for Tennyson myself. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." Surprised, Josephine stopped walking. "You know Tennyson?" Parker's smile widened. "Don't look so shocked, Miss Valmont. Even cowboys can appreciate good poetry." For the first time since arriving in Red Rock, Josephine felt the corners of her mouth turn upward. "I didn't mean to suggest. No offense taken. Most folks assume I can only read cattle brands." He dismounted, leading his horse beside her. "May I walk with you?" She hesitated, conscious of her torn glove. "I should return to the boarding house." "Allow me to escort you, then." These streets can be unpredictable on Saturdays when the miners come to town. As if to prove his point, a group of rowdy men emerged from the saloon down the street, their loud voices carrying in the afternoon air. "Very well," Josephine conceded. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Parker spoke again. "How are you finding Red Rock? It's different from Boston." "I imagine so. Fewer fancy theaters and elegant dinner parties out here." "And more dust," she added, surprising herself with the light comment. Parker laughed, a rich, warm sound that stirred something inside her. "Plenty more dust, that's certain. But there's beauty here too. The sunrise over the mesas, star-filled nights so clear you feel you could touch heaven, wildflowers that somehow survive in this harsh land." His poetic description caught her off guard. "You speak as if you love it deeply." "I do. Born and raised in these territories. Couldn't imagine living anywhere else." He glanced at her. "But I suppose it takes getting used to for an Easterner." They reached the boarding house too quickly. Parker stopped at the gate, respectful of propriety. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Jones." "Parker, please." He hesitated, then added, There's a social at the church next Saturday evening. Nothing fancy, just music, dancing, and Mrs. Wilson's apple pie, which alone is worth attending for. Would you consider coming? Josephine's instinct was to refuse immediately. Dancing meant removing gloves, exposing her hands for all to see. But something in his gray eyes made her pause. I don't dance, Mr. Jones. Not even one dance, for a fellow admirer of Tennyson. She shook her head firmly. Good day. As she climbed the steps to the boarding house, she heard him call after her. I'll be there anyway, Miss Valmont, should you change your mind. Inside her room, Josephine carefully removed her gloves. The tear was small but noticeable. She would need to replace them soon, an expense she hadn't anticipated. Sighing, she took out her sewing kit and began the delicate work of mending the seam. As she worked, her thoughts drifted to Parker Jones. There was something disarming about his forthright manner and unexpected intellect. In another life, before the fire, she might have accepted his invitation. She might have danced in his arms beneath the stars, felt the strength of his hands holding hers. But that was impossible now. She looked down at her scarred hands, the puckered skin a permanent reminder of what she had lost. No man, especially not one as handsome and charming as Parker Jones, would want to touch these hands. The week passed in a blur of patience and paperwork. A fever had spread through the mining camp north of town, keeping Dr. Nelson and Josephine busy with a steady stream of sick men. By Saturday, the crisis had passed, and Dr. Nelson insisted she take the evening off. The church social would do you good, he suggested. You've been working too hard. I prefer quiet evenings with my books, Josephine replied, arranging medicines on the shelf. Dr. Nelson studied her thoughtfully. Miss Valmont, may I speak frankly? Of course, sir. I've observed your tendency to isolate yourself. While I respect your privacy, I worry that you're allowing whatever burdens you carry to prevent you from living fully. Josephine stiffened. I'm not sure what you mean. Your hands, he said gently. I am a doctor, my dear. I've noticed how you hide them, how you never remove your gloves even when it would make your work easier. Heat rose to her cheeks. It's a personal matter. Indeed it is, and not my place to pry. He smiled kindly. But as your employer and, I hope, your friend, let me say this. Wounds, even those that leave scars, need air and light to heal completely. His words followed her back to the boarding house, echoing in her mind as she changed from her work dress into her only other suitable outfit, a simple navy blue dress with white trim at the collar and cuffs. It was outdated by Boston standards, but perfectly adequate for Red Rock. She stood before the small mirror, studying her reflection. At 22, she still possessed the bright eyes and clear complexion of youth. Her chestnut hair, pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, complemented her fair skin. She had once been considered pretty in Boston, before the accident left her afraid to meet anyone's gaze for too long. The sounds of music drifted through her open window, a fiddle playing a lively tune, accompanied by laughter and the murmur of voices. The church was only a block away, its doors and windows open to the cool evening air. Before she could second-guess herself, Josephine pulled on a fresh pair of gloves, picked up her shawl, and headed downstairs. Mrs. Pemberton looked up in surprise from her knitting as Josephine passed through the parlor. Going out, Miss Valmont. How nice to see you joining in the community. Just for a little while, Josephine replied, already regretting her impulse. The churchyard was transformed with lanterns hanging from tree branches, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Tables laden with food lined one side, while musicians played on a small platform. Couples danced in the open space before the church steps, their faces alight with joy and exertion. Josephine hesitated at the edge of the crowd, suddenly overwhelmed. She hadn't attended a social gathering since before the fire. Perhaps this had been a mistake. You came. She turned to find Parker Jones standing beside her, his usual work clothes replaced by clean dark trousers and a crisp white shirt. His hair, normally hidden beneath a hat, was the color of burnished copper in the lantern light. Yes, though I'm not staying long. Long enough for some apple pie, I hope. He offered his arm. Mrs. Wilson saves the best piece for me, but I'm willing to share this honor with you. Despite her nervousness, Josephine found herself smiling. How gallant. I have my moments. He led her toward the food tables, nodding and exchanging greetings with townspeople as they passed. Truth be told, I didn't think you'd come. Neither did I, she admitted. What changed your mind? She considered the question. Dr. Nelson suggested I needed fresh air. Smart man, the doctor. Parker filled 2 plates with generous slices of pie. Let's find somewhere to sit and enjoy this properly. They found a quiet spot on a bench beneath an old cottonwood tree, just far enough from the music to allow conversation. The pie was indeed delicious, sweet and spiced with cinnamon, the crust flaky and buttered. You weren't exaggerating about Mrs. Wilson's talents, Josephine said after her first bite. Never about important matters like pie. Parker's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. So, Miss Valmont, what brought you all the way from Boston to our dusty corner of the territory? Josephine tensed. A change of scenery. That's quite a change. Most folks heading west stop in Denver or Santa Fe. Red Rock isn't exactly on the main route. I saw Dr. Nelson's advertisement in a medical journal. The position suited my experience. Parker studied her thoughtfully. Running to something or away from something, his perception startled her. I don't see how that's any of your concern, Mr. Jones. It's not, he acknowledged easily. Just curious about what would bring a clearly educated, refined Boston lady to a place like this. He set his empty plate aside. For myself, I've never wanted to be anywhere else. My father started the Double Circle with just 20 head of cattle and a dream. Built it into one of the largest spreads in the territory. And now you run it, a shadow crossed his face. Since Pa passed last year, my mother lives in Tucson now with my sister and her family. I try to visit when I can. I'm sorry about your father. Thank you. He looked toward the dancers, then back to her. The music slowed, perfect for those who claim not to dance. Josephine shook her head firmly. I told you one dance, he pressed gently. No one's watching, just a simple waltz. I can't, she said, more sharply than intended. Parker's expression softened with understanding. It's your hands, isn't it? That's why you always wear gloves, even in this heat. Josephine stood abruptly. I should go. He rose with her, not touching her but standing close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and something uniquely him. Whatever happened, whatever you're hiding, it doesn't matter to me. You don't know what you're saying. She turned to leave, but his next words stopped her. I've got scars too, Josephine. Most aren't visible, but they are there. She looked back at him, struck by the earnestness in his expression. For a moment, she almost believed him, almost believed that someone could look past her disfigurement to the woman beneath. Good night, Mr. Jones. She walked away, ignoring the ache in her chest. Behind her, the music continued, the laughter flowed, and life went on for people untouched by the kind of pain that marked her every day. Sunday morning brought an unexpected knock at her boarding house door. Mrs. Pemberton called up the stairs. Miss Valmont, you're needed at the doctor's office. Emergency. Josephine dressed quickly, securing her hair and pulling on her gloves before hurrying downstairs. Outside, a ranch hand she didn't recognize waited on horseback. Doctor Nelson sent me to fetch you, madam. There's been an accident at the Double Circle. Her heart skipped a beat. What kind of accident? Barn fire. 2 men injured bad. Doc's already there but needs help. A wagon waited nearby. Josephine climbed in, and the ranch hand spurred his horse forward, leading the way out of town at a brisk pace. The Double Circle Ranch lay 5 miles east of Red Rock, a journey that took nearly an hour over rough terrain. As they approached, Josephine saw smoke still rising from the charred remains of what had been a large barn. Men with buckets formed a line from the well to the smoldering structure, ensuring the fire wouldn't reignite. The ranch hand directed her to the main house, a substantial 2-story building with a wide porch. Inside, she found Dr. Nelson tending to a young man on a dining table converted to an examination surface. Another injured man lay on a sofa in the adjacent sitting room. "Ah, Miss Valmont. Thank you for coming so quickly," Dr. Nelson said, not looking up from his work. "Second-degree burns on Mr. Peterson here. Mr. Daniels in the other room has some bad cuts and a suspected broken arm from falling timber." Josephine set to work immediately, checking on the second patient before gathering clean water and preparing bandages. For the next 2 hours, she assisted Dr. Nelson in treating the burn victim, applying salve and carefully wrapping the injured areas. The smell of burned flesh brought back memories she'd fought to suppress, but she maintained her professional composure. "Where is Mr. Jones?" she finally asked as they finished with the first patient. "Still helping with the barn," Dr. Nelson replied. "Fortunately, he wasn't injured. He managed to get the horses out and then went back for his men." After stabilizing both patients, Dr. Nelson prepared to return to town. "I need to get more supplies. Can you stay and monitor them? I'll send the wagon back for you this evening." "Of course," Josephine agreed, though the prospect of remaining at Parker's home made her uneasy. Left alone with the sleeping patients, she busied herself cleaning up the medical supplies. The house was spacious and well-appointed, with solid furniture and touches of refinement that suggested a woman's influence, perhaps Parker's mother, before she moved to Tucson. She was arranging fresh water and bandages when the front door opened. Parker entered, his face streaked with soot, his shirt torn and singed in places. "Miss Valmont," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I didn't realize you were still here. Dr. Nelson asked me to stay with the patients until he returns." She gestured to a chair. "You should sit. Let me check you for injuries." "I'm fine," he insisted, though he winced as he moved. "Sit," she repeated more firmly. Surprisingly, he complied, dropping into a chair with a heavy sigh. "How are Peterson and Daniels? Stable?" "Mr. Peterson's burns will take time to heal, but they're not life-threatening. Mr. Daniels has a broken arm and some cuts, but he'll recover." She poured clean water into a basin and approached him with a cloth. "May I?" he nodded, closing his eyes as she gently wiped the soot from his face. A cut above his eyebrow had bled freely but was beginning to clot. "This should be cleaned properly," she said, her professional tone masking her awareness of his proximity. "Do your worst, nurse," he replied with a hint of his usual humor, though exhaustion lined his face. As she cleaned the cut, she asked, "What happened?" "Lightning strike. Hit the barn during that brief storm this morning. The hay went up like tinder." He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. "We got the horses out, but Peterson went back for a saddle his father had given him. Daniels and I went in after him when he didn't come out." "That was brave." "That was foolish," he corrected, "but I couldn't let him die for a piece of leather, no matter how sentimental." Josephine applied salve to the cut, her gloved fingers gentle against his skin. "You saved his life." "We all did our part." He caught her wrist as she withdrew her hand. "Thank you for coming out here, for helping." The contact, even through her glove, sent warmth spreading through her. "It's my job." Still, his gaze was intense, searching. About last night, please don't, she interrupted. It's better if we don't discuss it. He released her wrist but continued to watch her. Why are you so afraid, Josephine? The use of her given name startled her. I'm not afraid, aren't you? You hide behind those gloves and that professional manner like they're armor. Anger flared within her. You know nothing about me or what I've experienced. Then tell me, he challenged softly. Help me understand. For a moment, she was tempted to unburden herself, to share the weight she'd carried alone for so long, but experience had taught her caution. I need to check on Mr. Peterson, she said, turning away. Parker didn't follow, allowing her the space she needed. For the next few hours, they maintained a careful distance, she tending to the patients, he coordinating the cleanup efforts outside. When he returned to the house, he brought her a plate of food prepared by the ranch cook. You need to eat, he said simply, placing it on the table beside her. Thank you. She waited until he left before removing one glove to eat, careful to keep her scarred hand hidden from view. As evening approached, Dr. Nelson returned with fresh supplies and a wagon to take Josephine back to town. Parker stood on the porch as she prepared to leave. I'll come to town tomorrow to check on my men, he said. Perhaps we could continue our conversation then. There's nothing more to say, she replied, keeping her voice low as Dr. Nelson loaded his supplies. I disagree. Parker stepped closer, speaking for her ears alone. Whatever you're hiding, whatever you're afraid of, it doesn't change what I see when I look at you. And what is that? She asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. His answer was simple but devastating in its sincerity. A woman of extraordinary courage and compassion. A woman I'd like to know better if she'd allow it. Before she could respond, Dr. Nelson called for her. With a nod of farewell, she climbed into the wagon, her thoughts in turmoil as they pulled away from the double circle. The following days brought a steady stream of visitors to Dr. Nelson's office, ranch hands coming to check on their injured comrades, townspeople curious about the fire, and Parker Jones, who came every morning and evening without fail. His visits were brief and proper. He would inquire about Peterson and Daniels, exchange pleasantries with Dr. Nelson, and always find a moment to speak privately with Josephine. Sometimes he brought a book he thought she might enjoy or wildflowers that reminded me of your eyes. Each time, she maintained her professional distance, yet found it increasingly difficult to ignore the warmth that bloomed within her at his attention. No man had ever pursued her with such gentle persistence. A week after the fire, Peterson and Daniels were well enough to be moved back to the ranch. As they prepared to leave, Parker approached Josephine with an unusual request. Would you consider coming to the ranch once a week to check on their progress? I'd send a wagon for you, of course. Before she could refuse, Dr. Nelson interjected. An excellent suggestion. Miss Valmont, you could go on Wednesday afternoons when we're typically less busy. Trapped by her employer's approval, Josephine reluctantly agreed. If you think it's necessary. I do, Parker said, his eyes twinkling with triumph. Most necessary indeed. The following Wednesday found Josephine traveling once again to the double circle. This time, however, the ranch hand drove at a more leisurely pace, allowing her to appreciate the landscape. The desert was in bloom after recent rains, patches of wildflowers adding color to the rugged terrain. At the ranch, Parker himself greeted her, helping her down from the wagon with a touch that lingered just a moment too long. Welcome back, he said. Peterson and Daniels are waiting in the bunkhouse, though I suspect they're more excited about missing work than seeing a nurse. The patients were indeed improving, their wounds healing well. After examining them and changing bandages, Josephine found herself with time to spare before the wagon would return her to town. I thought you might enjoy seeing the ranch, Parker suggested. It's cooled down enough for a short ride. She hesitated. I don't ride. No. Well, we can walk instead. There's a spot not far from the house with a view worth seeing. Against her better judgment, Josephine agreed. They walked side by side along a well-worn path that led up a gentle slope behind the main house. Neither spoke, but the silence between them felt comfortable rather than strained. At the top of the rise, Parker stopped. Before them stretched a vista of rugged beauty, rolling hills giving way to distant mesas, the landscape painted in hues of red, gold, and purple as the afternoon sun began its descent. It's beautiful, Josephine said softly. This is my favorite place on the ranch, Parker replied. My father used to bring me here when I was a boy. He'd point to the horizon and say, "Remember, son, no matter how big your troubles seem, they're small beneath a sky like that." Wise words. He was a wise man. Parker turned to face her. Which makes me wonder why I find it so hard to follow his advice when it comes to you. Josephine's heart quickened. What do you mean? I mean that my thoughts are filled with you, day and night. That I find myself inventing reasons to ride into town just to see you for a few minutes. He took a step closer, and that no matter how many times you push me away, I can't seem to stay away. You should, she whispered, stay away. Why? Because of whatever happened to your hands. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Trust me enough to tell me. The setting sun cast long shadows across the land, painting everything in golden light. In that moment, surrounded by such vast beauty, her secret seemed smaller somehow. There was a fire, she began, her voice barely audible. At the textile mill where I worked part-time while training as a nurse. One of the machines sparked and the cotton dust ignited. Parker remained silent, giving her space to continue. There were girls trapped inside, young girls who worked the looms. I helped get them out, but... She swallowed hard. The last girl was terrified, frozen. I had to drag her through the flames. My gloves caught fire, burned away. She closed her eyes, remembering the searing pain, the smell of her own flesh burning. My hands were badly burned. The doctors saved them, but the scars... Her voice broke. They're hideous. Look at me, Parker said gently. When she did, the compassion in his eyes nearly undid her. You saved lives that day. There's nothing hideous about that. You haven't seen them, she countered. Show me. Panic rose within her. No, please, Josephine. He reached for her hand but stopped short of touching her. I want to know all of you, not just the parts you think are acceptable. For a long moment, she stood frozen, torn between fear and a desperate desire to be known, truly known by this man. Slowly, her fingers trembling, she removed the glove from her right hand. The scarred skin, mottled pink and white, caught the fading sunlight. Years of healing had made the scars less angry, but they remained a permanent reminder of that terrible day. She kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, unable to watch as Parker looked at her disfigurement. When he said nothing, she began to replace the glove, humiliation burning hotter than the long-ago flames. Don't, he said, his voice husky with emotion. Before she could protest, he took her bare hand in his, cradling it gently between his calloused palms. Then, with infinite tenderness, he raised it to his lips and kissed the scarred knuckles. These hands saved lives, he murmured against her skin. How could I find them anything but beautiful? Tears welled in Josephine's eyes as Parker continued, pressing a kiss to each finger, each scar, each reminder of her pain. No one had touched her hand since the doctors in Boston, and certainly never with such reverence. Parker, she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. He looked up, his eyes reflecting the same wonder she felt. I've been falling in love with you since the moment you scolded me for nearly running you down in the street. These, He pressed another kiss to her palm. Change nothing. A tear slipped down her cheek. How can you say that? Look at them. I am looking. He gently removed her other glove, exposing both hands to the fading light. I see courage, strength, compassion. With each word, he kissed another finger until a reluctant smile began to form on her lips. And now I see something else. What? She asked, barely breathing. Hope, he smiled, the warmth of it reaching his eyes. There's my smile, I've been waiting for it. In that moment, with the vast Arizona sky above them and her hands bare for the first time in years, Josephine felt something break free within her, a cage of fear and shame she had built around her heart. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to let someone see me as I am. We'll figure it out together, Parker promised. One day at a time. As darkness fell, they walked back to the house hand in hand, her scars exposed to the cool evening air for the first time since she'd left Boston. And though anxiety still fluttered in her chest, the weight of Parker's hand in hers anchored her to this new possibility, a life without hiding. The weeks that followed brought gradual changes. Josephine continued her weekly visits to the ranch, ostensibly to check on Peterson and Daniels, though both men were healing well. Each visit extended longer than the last, as Parker showed her his favorite spots on the double circle, the creek where he'd learned to swim, the old oak where he'd built a fort as a boy, the meadow where wildflowers grew in profusion after summer rains. In town, he called at the doctor's office regularly, sometimes bringing books they could discuss, other times simply sitting with her during her lunch break. Dr. Nelson observed their growing attachment with quiet approval, occasionally adjusting Josephine's schedule to allow more time for these visits. Most significant was Josephine's slow emergence from behind her protective walls. She began removing her gloves while working in the privacy of the doctor's office, finding that her dexterity improved considerably without them. Dr. Nelson simply nodded in satisfaction the first time she did so, making no comment on her scarred hands. 2 months after the barn fire, Parker invited her to Sunday dinner at the ranch. My mother and sister are visiting from Tucson, he explained. They're eager to meet you. Anxiety flooded her at the thought of meeting his family. Are you sure that's wise? We've only known each other a short time. Time enough for me to know my own heart, he replied with characteristic directness. Unless you're not ready, the question hung between them, laden with meaning. Josephine took a deep breath. I'll come, but I can't promise. I'm not asking for promises, Parker assured her. Just your company. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that tempered the late summer heat. Josephine chose her best dress, a sage green that complemented her eyes, and arranged her hair with extra care. At the last moment, she selected a pair of thin lace gloves, a compromise between hiding and complete exposure. The ranch house had been transformed since her last visit. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, delicious aromas wafted from the kitchen, and the dining table was set with what appeared to be the family's best china. Parker's mother, Eleanor Jones, was a handsome woman in her 50s with the same copper hair as her son, though streaked with silver. His sister, Margaret, was younger by perhaps 5 years, with a friendly smile and a curious gaze. So you're the nurse who's captured my son's attention, Eleanor said after introductions were made. He speaks very highly of your skills. Mother, Parker warned, though his eyes danced with amusement. What? It's a compliment. Eleanor turned back to Josephine. He tells me you're from Boston. How are you finding our territory? Different, Josephine replied honestly, but beautiful in its own way. It grows on you, Margaret agreed. When I first moved to Tucson with my husband, I thought I'd never get used to the heat and dust. Now I can't imagine living anywhere else. Dinner was a relaxed affair, with conversation flowing easily between courses of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh vegetables from the ranch garden. Parker's family asked questions about her life in Boston, but never pried, when she kept her answers vague about her reasons for leaving. After the meal, Margaret suggested taking coffee on the porch to enjoy the evening air. As they settled into chairs, Alina asked about Josephine's family. "I have an aunt in Boston," she explained. "My parents passed when I was young." "I'm sorry to hear that," Alina said with genuine sympathy. "Family is precious." "Yes," Josephine agreed, unconsciously touching her gloved hands together. Alina's gaze followed the movement. "Parker mentioned you were injured in a fire." Josephine tensed, shooting a questioning look at Parker. "I hope you don't mind," he said softly. "My mother asked why you always wore gloves." Before she could respond, Alina reached across and placed her hand atop Josephine's. "My dear, you have nothing to hide here. My husband Parker's father lost 2 fingers in a ranching accident. Scars are just proof we've survived something difficult." The simple acceptance in Alina's voice brought tears to Josephine's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Later, as the sun set in a blaze of color, Parker walked Josephine to the waiting wagon that would return her to town. "I'm sorry if Mother was too forward," he said. "She means well." "She was kind," Josephine replied. "Your whole family was. They liked you." He took her hands in his. "Almost as much as I do." The warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. "Parker, I know it's soon," he said quickly. "And I'm not asking for an answer today, but I want you to know my intentions." "Your intentions," he smiled, that slow, sure smile that never failed to warm her from within. "To court you properly, Josephine Valmont. To prove to you that what I feel isn't going to change or fade away." "And what is it that you feel?" she asked, hardly daring to believe. Instead of answering with words, Parker leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss that spoke volumes. When he pulled away, his eyes held hers with unwavering certainty. "Does that answer your question?" she nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. "Good." He helped her into the wagon. "I'll see you tomorrow." As the wagon pulled away, Josephine touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the imprint of his kiss. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope not just for acceptance, but for happiness. The weeks turned to months, and as autumn painted the landscape in new colors, Josephine found herself transforming as well. The cautious, guarded woman who had arrived in Red Rock began to fade, replaced by someone who laughed more freely, who occasionally went without gloves when the situation allowed it, who began to see possibilities rather than limitations. Parker courted her with steadfast devotion, never pushing but always present. He brought her wildflowers and poetry books, took her on picnics to hidden springs in the desert, and introduced her to the joys of horseback riding. Each time they parted, he kissed her hands, first the gloved ones, and eventually, as her trust in him grew, the bare, scarred ones. By Christmas, Josephine had accepted that her feelings for Parker went far beyond affection. She loved him, his strength and gentleness, his intelligence and humor, his unwavering acceptance of her exactly as she was. Snow rarely fell in their part of Arizona, but a cold snap had brought a dusting of white to Red Rock in time for Christmas Eve. The town gathered at the church for a special service, followed by a celebration in the decorated churchyard. Parker found her near the refreshment table, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. "Walk with me," he asked, offering his arm. They strolled away from the crowd, their breath forming clouds in the frosty air. Parker seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous. "Is something wrong?" Josephine asked. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually." More right than I ever thought possible. Before she could question him further, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Josephine's heart stuttered in her chest. "I had planned a speech," Parker said, his voice husky with emotion, "about how you've changed my life, how I can't imagine my future without you in it. But now that the moment's here, I find I just want to ask." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Josephine Valmont, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes, blurring her vision. "Parker, are you sure? My hands. Your hands are part of you, and I love every part of you." He took her right hand, and as he had done that first evening on the hilltop, kissed each scarred finger. "These hands saved lives. They heal the sick. They've held mine when I needed strength." He placed the final kiss on her palm. "And I hope they'll continue to hold mine for the rest of our lives." Through her tears, Josephine smiled, a full, radiant smile that contained all the joy she'd never thought she'd feel again. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Parker slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of acceptance and love. They were married in the spring, when the desert bloomed with life after winter rains. The ceremony was held at the double circle, beneath the same vast sky where Parker had first shown Josephine that her scars could be seen as beautiful. Dr. Nelson gave the bride away, his usually serious face alight with happiness for the couple he had watched grow together. Eleanor Jones wept openly as her son spoke his vows, while Margaret stood as Josephine's matron of honor, having become a dear friend in the months leading to the wedding. Most meaningful to Josephine was her decision to walk down the aisle without gloves, her scarred hands visible to all as she joined them with Parker's. No longer symbols of shame, they had become reminders of resilience and of the man who had taught her that true love sees beyond surface imperfections to the heart beneath. As they exchanged rings and promises, Josephine thought of how far she had come from that frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Red Rock. The journey hadn't been easy, but with Parker beside her, she had found the courage to emerge from hiding and embrace life fully. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Parker lifted her hands to his lips first, maintaining their tradition with a kiss to each finger before claiming her lips in a kiss that sealed their union. The celebration continued well into the evening, with dancing and feasting beneath stars that seemed to shine especially bright for the occasion. As night fell, Parker led his bride away from the revelry, toward the newly built addition to the main house that would be their private quarters. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jones," he said as they crossed the threshold. Josephine looked around the comfortable rooms, designed with touches that reflected both their tastes: bookshelves filled with poetry and medical texts, large windows to capture the desert views, a desk where she could continue her medical studies. "It's perfect," she whispered. Parker drew her into his arms. "You're perfect." "Hardly," she laughed, "but I'm perfectly happy. That's all I've wanted since the day I met you, to see you smile without shadows in your eyes." She reached up to touch his face, her scarred fingers tracing the beloved contours without hesitation or shame. "You've given me so much more than happiness, Parker. You've given me back myself." In the years that followed, their love only deepened. Josephine continued working with Dr. Nelson while also serving as the unofficial medical provider for the Double Circle and surrounding ranches. When Dr. Nelson eventually retired, she took over his practice with his blessing, becoming the first female doctor in the county. Parker expanded the ranch operations, experimenting with new breeding techniques that improved their cattle stock. Together, they built a life filled with purpose and joy, weathering the inevitable challenges of ranching life with the same strength that had brought them together. Their family grew with the birth of a daughter, Elena Rose, followed 2 years later by twins, James and William. Josephine taught her children from the beginning that scars told stories of courage, not shame, a lesson they carried into their own lives as they grew. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Parker surprised Josephine with a special gift, a collection of her aunt's letters, carefully preserved over the years, along with train tickets to Boston. "I thought it might be time to visit," he explained. "To show your aunt the family you've built and the woman you've become." Josephine's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "How did you know I've been thinking about this?" "Because I know you," he said simply. "Your heart has healed, but there are still connections that matter to you in Boston." The journey east was a revelation. Boston had changed in the decade since Josephine had fled, but so had she. Walking the familiar streets with Parker and their children, she felt neither the shame that had driven her away nor the desperate need to hide. Instead, she experienced the quiet confidence of a woman who had made peace with her past. Her reunion with Aunt Martha was tearful and joyous. The older woman embraced Josephine tightly, then stepped back to look at her niece's uncovered hands. "You've stopped hiding them," she observed. "I found someone who helped me see they weren't something to hide," Josephine replied, glancing at Parker with love. They visited the site of the textile mill, now rebuilt and operating under stricter safety regulations. Josephine stood silently for a moment, remembering the fire that had changed the course of her life. "Regrets?" Parker asked softly. She shook her head. "No, if not for this," she looked down at her scarred hands, "I might never have found my way to Red Rock, to you." Upon their return to Arizona, life settled back into its comfortable rhythms: the ranch, the medical practice, the growing children. Yet Josephine often reflected on how differently her life might have unfolded had she continued hiding. Had she rejected Parker's persistent kindness? Had she never found the courage to remove her gloves and show her true self? On summer evenings, she and Parker would often sit on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. Their hands would be intertwined, her scars long since accepted as simply another part of the woman he loved. "You remember the first time you kissed my hands?" she asked one such evening, their children playing nearby under the watchful eye of Elena, who visited regularly from Tucson. "I remember everything about that day," Parker replied, raising her hand to his lips in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "The sunset, the wildflowers, the way you trembled when you took off your glove. I was terrified you'd be disgusted." "I was in awe of you," he corrected. "Still am." Josephine leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. Who would have thought that a Boston nurse with scarred hands would find happiness with a poetry-quoting cowboy in the Arizona Territory? Parker chuckled, the sound vibrating through her. "The best stories are the ones you never see coming." As twilight deepened into night, Josephine looked at her family, her husband, her children, the life they had built together, and silently thanked whatever fate or providence had led her to Red Rock, to this man who had seen beauty where she had seen only shame. The scars remained, permanent reminders of that terrible day in Boston. But Parker had transformed their meaning, kissing each finger until she smiled, until she believed that damaged things could still be worthy of love. In doing so, he had healed more than just her hands, he had healed her heart. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all.